Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the library. My name is Nicole Luongo-Cloutier. I am the Reference and Special Collections Supervisor here in the library. I see a lot of really great library users in this room, a lot of familiar faces, and lots of people who have come to our genealogy programming and local history. So thank you so much. I am standing in for Christy Bryant, who is apologizing that she could not be here today to introduce our program. She's our programming librarian. I just have a couple of housekeeping kinds of things to tell you about. First of all, there are 2 exits in this room on either side, should you need to exit quickly. Out in this hallway to the left is the restroom. Feel free to get up at any point if you need to exit the room. The other thing is that we should silence all our cell phones if we have not done so. And then I would like to thank the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire and the Moffett Ladd House for partnering and bringing this great program to the library. We love our community partners and our community institutions and local history folks. Without further ado, I want to just turn this over, but I just wanted to mention, since this program is very much about genealogy, we do have genealogy workshops monthly. The next one is May 19th from 2 to 4. It's called A Recipe for Success, Finding Women Through Community Cookbooks. And then every other month we do just like a genealogy drop-in. We call it a huddle, and it's just up in the special collections room, and we have some experts in our local history librarian and sometimes myself up there helping people kind of unearth and get through brick walls and answer questions about our resources. So please come and visit us, okay? Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Erica McAvoy, and I'm the Executive Director of the Moffett Ladd House and Garden here in Portsmouth. I'd like to first thank Shelia and Tonya for being here today and being so willing to tell their fascinating stories, and also to Laurel, who unfortunately couldn't make it, but hopefully we'll be able to see her again soon. We'd also like to thank the Black Heritage Trail for your partnership. This is a very exciting partnership for us, and thank you to also to the Portsmouth Public Library for hosting us here today. This is an exciting moment for us here at the Moffett Ladd, as well as for Portsmouth, and I am thrilled that we get to share it together this morning. I hope that this conversation will inspire lots of thought and consideration, and perhaps encourage you all to explore your own family history, but also to explore what the Black Heritage Trail has to offer as far as walking tours here in Portsmouth, and also to visit us at the Moffett Ladd House on Market Street. So I'm going to keep this short, but I just want to thank you all for coming here in person and also online, and thank you again to the Black Heritage Trail and to the descendants. Thank you.
Well, we got our third good morning, so good morning. I am Tanisha Johnson, and I am the Vice Chair of the Black Heritage Trail. So from the Black Heritage Trail, we wanted to welcome you all here to this inspiring morning. I'm not feeling it, so I'm gonna need y'all to smile. Let me get a we are very sorry that Laurel could not be here with us today. However, we are grateful to Ms. Shelia Reed Finley for stepping in and helping us to have this engaging conversation. We also want to thank the Portsmouth Public Library and the Moffett Ladd House and the New Hampshire Humanities. And so I am here to introduce the amazing Executive Director of the Black Heritage Trail. So I'm gonna turn it over to you. Wait, no.
Oh, you can keep that.
I don't follow instructions.
So you must all feel really welcomed, 4 in a time zone. And it's really good because we made a pivot from a talk, and it's really going to be a conversation. So what we're looking for is for you to engage, for you to listen, for you to share. Just want to double check who's in the room before we get started. Has anybody done genealogy work on their own ancestry? Pretty good. Has anybody discovered surprising stuff in their genealogy? All right, so we'll get to talk a little bit about that. And have anybody done any work on diversity and inclusion and slavery in New England? All right, so we got some people in here that hopefully we'll all learn from each other, and we'll share the information we have. I know we have some guests who are coming to this for the first time and trying to understand what this is, and I want to welcome the family, your family,
Oh, yes.
before I introduce them.
Yeah, in the room, I have two first cousins and an uncle, and my mother is here. And in the Zoom, I see my father and my husband and my teenagers. So 3 generations of our family. And also many colleagues, friends, neighbors, college roommate. I'm seeing a lot of people on the chat who are virtual.
Thank
So
you.
imagine a bigger circle, and we want to have conversations like this with our whole community, all our networks.
And we have our surprise guest, and that I'm really, really excited, because Sheila's been doing this work for a long time. And Sheila's story is really particularly interested, even a connection to Harriet Tubman that she'll tell you about, and a longtime resident of Portsmouth. Some of us may be very, very surprised to know that slavery did exist in the North, and so these stories will tell us these connections. We're looking for these personal connections because we strongly believe it's through sharing these stories, understanding each other on that personal, emotional level, that we can break these racist stereotypes that we have of each other, that we can communicate better, that we can have our moments. Our country hasn't had it yet, but we can have our moments of reconciliation, which we really need to move beyond. We have to do this step to get to our next step of really being that inclusive, just society that we all believe in and believe that America is. So Sheila, passing it on to you to introduce yourself to the audience. If you both introduce, then we'll get started.
Okay, so I am Shelia Reed Finley. I've always kind of carried my maiden name, always very proud of it. I'm back in Portsmouth. I've been gone for 22 years. I taught in New York City for 15, and then I went to Louisiana to be with my sister for about 5, and then on the way back, I stopped in Virginia to help my niece and nephew out. It was during the year that there was no school, so I coordinated the education at home with their kindergartner and their 5th grader. And Mom got pregnant, so I stayed an extra year. And I loved it, and it was very difficult to pull myself away, but Portsmouth always calls. So the picture's up, right?
Oh, not yet, but I'll share
It's
it
okay.
for you.
So
Absolutely.
I brought the original picture, she's going to put it up here, of my family, who was the original family that came to Portsmouth. In 1865, my great-grandfather, right after emancipation, right after emancipation, he was brought by Captain William T. Benton, and as you know, Benton's a very familiar name in New Hampshire. Silas Benton, his grandfather, I believe, is one of the signers of the Constitution, not the Constitution, I'll think about it, I'll think of it in a minute. And they were originally from, I believe, Derry, and somehow ended up in Portsmouth. And it was through that family, again, that my great-grandfather Samuel Reed, who is bottom seated on the right, brought him to Portsmouth at 10 years old. But I didn't know he was 10 years old until later on I did some research. Anyway, it just carried on from there. That's my father's family. My father never kept the history. My mother kept his history. And on my mother's side, Jones, her father, my grandfather, kept not only his history, but my grandmother's history. And it always intrigued me. And Valerie Cunningham is in the back. And one time she said to me, "What do you know about your family?" And I said, "Not a lot." And she said, "Well, you better get started." And I did. And that was about 1992. And I'm pleased to be here to answer any questions. I'm very proud of the history, not just my family history, everybody's family history, and particularly, I'm proud of Portsmouth, and I tend to get a little emotional about it. So that's it.
Thank you, Sheila.
You're welcome.
Well, Sheila, it's an honor to meet you for the first time in this event. This is a real live conversation coming together. You wanted me to introduce myself. I'm Tonya Ward's singer, and I was born in California to parents from New England. I now know I'm the first of 11 generations to be born outside of New England. Lot of roots in the seacoast to Essex County. And I was completely unaware of slavery in New England until 2016. I also thought history and genealogy were boring until 2016. So we'll share with you in a moment how I got hooked in. But I want to add to my introduction a deep, deep gratitude and thank you to Laurel Guild Yancey, who is a sixth-generation descendant of Prince Whipple and Dinah Chase Whipple. She and I really co-envisioned this event together. And as you've heard, we regret that she can't be here. But I just want to thank her because we have been collaborating through email, text, Zoom, ongoing for this to happen. And there will be other conversations where we will share a story. But just she's in the room. Honored to be here.
I am honored as well.
Okay. Well, that was quick introductions. I thought they were going to talk for like longer. Well, I do have to acknowledge Valerie Cunningham, who is hiding in the back over there. The work she started as a little girl trying to find herself in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, turned into the Portsmouth Black Heritage Trail, turned into Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire, and as you can see, sparked all of these connections in finding your roots. Okay, so just to get us started, and you guys can think of questions that you want to ask and, to share. What has it been like for you to do this work, to discover these stories? What emotional change did you find in doing this work?
You want to start?
I feel like I might want to give a short overview of how I got where I found, then the emotional, but I will answer that directly to say, I'm now, since 2016, so this is a handful of years, and the emotional journey is an intense one, so as I share the beginning, it's more this, what? Shock? Anger? Shame? All kinds of feelings, and there's that urgency that happens, but over time, what's happened is I'm in relationship to my ancestors. Even the people who are enslavers, who I initially was like, I'm in relationship to their humanity to see like, how am I like you, and where did I come from, and to really reckon. So the reckoning, I actually feel now a very deep rooted sense. Like that's why I'm comfortable being like, let's have any conversation that we want to have about slavery, because emotions are big, they come like waves, but if you're standing, waves come, waves go. The most important thing is to not leave the conversation.
Yes.
Not leave the work.
Yes.
So maybe I'll stop there for the, I know you want my family story, but
We'll get
on the
there.
emotional question, that's my truth.
Yeah.
An emotional question is good. It's okay, because I can relate to that too.
So Tonya, you actually said that finding out these stories give you a rooted sense of self. And for all us African Americans, us Black folks, we're looking at what is our roots. We always think everybody here knows where they come from and know that long story. So Shelia, on this rootedness, what did you discover?
Well, you brought up the word roots, I think, or rooted. I always refer to the benefit of all of this research is from day one, it kept me rooted and grounded. And I had that. I do think I had that. My parents were strong. They led us in the right direction about who we were. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So thank you. My parents were good in that they taught us who we were and what there was to be proud of. But I didn't feel as rooted and grounded as I did when I started the research. That really did it for me. There were times when the research was difficult, Back in '92, there weren't a lot of resources. There was a site called for African American genealogy, Afrogenius. It's still up and running, but it never really gave you much help. It never gave you what you were looking for, or even to the next step. And then the Mormon Church came out, and you started, you know, when you do genealogy, you gotta have those initial records. You've gotta have them. You've gotta see where people were born. You've gotta look at those census records. You've gotta make those connections. And the excitement comes from, and the rootedness, if that's a word, and the grounding comes from finding those records. And I get goosebumps as I talk about it now, because my mother and father were both activists here in Portsmouth, and they were good at it. And my father always taught me, when you want to sit down and talk about race with somebody, don't get angry, because they're going to run. And so those were the greatest things he ever taught me. But I've seen him get angry at home because he could, because it was a hard fight for him. It was a very hard fight. And so I just think that being rooted and grounded can happen in many ways, but genealogy, for those of you who have not embarked upon the journey, boy, it's going to do exactly that for you. It's going to root you and ground you.
Thank you. God, I thought they were going to be so much more talkative, and I didn't have any work to do here.
I'm restraining myself. I could go there.
Me too.
So how do you think this, finding out this family history, have shaped your perspective on race?
Ooh. So for this one, I do want to share context, because I think, in addition to being ignorant about slavery in New England, and in my family, it's just, I need to just share the screen to share it, give you a little context here. Okay, so trying to keep it simple without getting lost in a lot of names. 11 generation direct ancestor to 5 generation direct ancestor. They're all in the seacoast. Kittery and then Portsmouth. Also, okay, well, how I got hooked was there's a family letter, a love letter written back here. They got passed down grandparent to grandchild, grandparent to grandchild, grandparent to grandchild to my grandfather. And I stumbled upon that letter in 2016. So I actually feel like history found me. But in the letter, I first got hooked on ancestors, but coming to this question about race, this sentence is what changed the course of my life. When I saw this sentence referencing sending 2 Negroes, 3 levels of shock happened. Slavery in my family? Slavery in New England? And then why am I shocked? I have an advanced degree. I've gone to 2 universities in New England. My parents have advanced degrees. So for me personally, to experience ignorance from the inside out, the feeling of this was not a willful denial, this was ignorance. And then to ask in my family, did you know this? Did you know this? And we're all like, we didn't know about. And my grandfather had passed it by that point. So there's the research of trying to find out the why, but let me just show you scope, and the scope matters for my understanding of race. Because what's really easy, for me personally, I'll speak for myself, but I imagine some people who identify as white may also have this experience. It's really easy to be righteous and think racism is a problem over there. Yeah. It's the Southerners, it's the whatever. So both living in California and living in New England, there's that. I mean, I can point to ancestors who were abolitionists, right? I can point to those ancestors. But it's hard to see my connection. And so let's take it in the present. I see something happening, and I could be like, oh, those racists over there, and I get really mad at those racists. But for me to start to reckon with, how am I complicit right now in internalized supremacy, internalized hierarchies, perpetuating racism in the systems within I work. So for me, it's gone from this sense of like the othering of race that is easy to do when have that privileged, unearned privilege status, where you see race over there, to being like, oh, I'm a racialized being white. And so in terms of the work for racial justice, let me show you this scope here. So this is when slavery was legal policy in the United States, that tan bar. This is when my ancestors were complicit in the slavery economy. Whether they were building ships, enslaving people directly, or slavery was over in the North, now they're trading in cotton and sugar and rum with the South. So to really see that many generations, and then look where my parents are. So when you think about, am I gonna do X, Y, or Z right now for reckoning, for repair, for activism, or am I gonna be like, no, I have other things I'm focusing on? I look at this, it's like, first of all, I'm late. I'm late to the conversation. I understand why even in my short lifetime, I feel like, yeah, I'm doing the best I can, I'm doing the best I can. But in a historical frame, I can understand why Black, Indigenous, and people of color can get frustrated sometimes with white people being in our little discovery story of like, I just figured this out. And it's like, welcome. We've been working for justice and liberation all this time while you were getting rich off of force-free labor.
Yeah, it's hard.
So it's not even just my conception of myself with race, it is literally every day. I am completely reoriented. And that also speaks to the rooted. I'm rooted in a sense of shared responsibility. It's not just I'm rooted in, oh, I'm so glad I have this great ancestor who gardens so well. Which is cool. I mean, you know, check out the gardens at the Moffett Ladd House, they're pretty cool. But I'm rooted in what Desmond Tutu said, your humanity is caught up in my humanity.
That's right.
And if you are diminished, I am diminished too.
And so many people have said that in many different ways all through the struggle. I think it was Dr. King who said something like, you're not free. If I'm not free, you're not free. It's the same concept. It's not too late. It's not too late for her. You feel rushed, but it is not too late, because the whole crux of everything is teach, teach, teach. Mm-hmm. And my grandmother, born in North Carolina, I'm sorry.
You go, it's Converse.
Born in North Carolina, but was from Portsmouth. But when her mom got pregnant, her dad, who was a porter downtown at what used to be Green's drugstore, I don't know if it was then, and he made the ice cream in the basement. He sent Mom to be with his family in North Carolina. And so when they came back, my grandmother was probably about 4 or 5 months old. But she always said, dress nice, and she was born in 1896. Dress nice, talk well, and, live by the golden rule in the 10 Commandments. And because that will get us forward. And there was some reality in that. But we all know that it takes that and a lot of other things, So you have to get out there and you have to work. I found that, I just want to jump from this family, the Reeds. When I ran into what we call the brick wall of slavery, I couldn't go any further. I wasn't frustrated, but I missed the research, but I couldn't go anywhere. Generally, people have always been warm to me as an African American, trying to, open the door. Did you know my family in Virginia? Because my great-grandfather was born into slavery in Virginia. But occasionally you ran into the person that was nice, but just did not want to hear anymore. I got nothing to do with that. And those were the days when you found phone numbers and would call people. But anyway, I missed the research when I ran into the brick wall of slavery. The resources that we had even 10 years later, we didn't have then. Now I have found, his wife who was sitting to his left, to his right. I've just solved the big mystery of how did he come here at 10 years old and then send for her when he was 29 years old to marry him? And my mother kept saying to me, it's simpler than you think. It's much simpler than you think. Well, now that with the DNA, and I found my great-grandfather and all of that, they were enslaved together. They were enslaved together. This is new to me in the last 3 months. Wow. They were enslaved together. I just wish my mother was here. I know she'd say, I told you so. Or I told you something, you know. I'm sure. But that was, sometimes you make it too complex. You know, and you know to go to, like the census records, you know to go there and look and see who else was living on that street, who was across the street, who was a few streets away. Try to find some old newspapers. What were people doing? What were the clubs and the organizations? But you also just have to use that common sense my mother had. And she just kept saying, well, it's simpler than that. Anyway, when I hit the brick wall of slavery, I missed the research. I wanted to keep working, but it was so difficult. And I remembered I was going through a box of mementos, and I had an old phone bill from when I lived in Los Angeles. And that was the only thing I had in my purse when I met James Brown. And he autographed the back of that telephone bill. Ma Bell, way back. And it was the only thing I had with me when I visited my grandmother, the one born in North Carolina but lived here. When I talked to her, she died about 5 or 6 years later, and she said to me one thing. Oh, I was so disappointed when we didn't get the house in Maine when my cousin died. She had promised that house to me, and I'm taking notes. She had promised that house to me, but something went awry and I didn't get it. I looked at that James Brown phone bill and the notes, that note I took, and I thought, wait a minute. She just gave me a whole bunch of information. She's from Portsmouth, born in North Carolina, but she had a huge family in Berwick, Maine. And I started immediately researching that family. Now, you know, the archives of Berwick, they've put up a page about the Williams, excuse me, the Williams family. And it's just amazing how the two families, the Williams and the Reeds, the history kind of just parallels. It really, the experiences were the same, very much the same. So when you embark upon this journey, and I hope that those of you who haven't do, always just remember to breathe and think that it can be fairly simple. It can be fairly simple to get some information that you really, really need.
So what I'm really marveling at here is the two different stories. Sheila, you came to your stories through what it seems like, some of them through the oral history,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And then doing the research. So,
Yes.
you know, there was that, you know, that search
Yes.
through what you heard and believing
Yes.
what you heard to be true
Yes.
from your ancestors,
Yes.
and then looking it up. And Tonya, you had these written documents, right? This letter, and you can go back 11 generations steadily to see that journey through primary documents, through letters, through, you know, and, you know, the African-American stories, that oral history that sometimes researchers do not like to rely on for for finding truth. You know, we go
Yes.
by the truth. So those are the
Oh,
two things that are
yes.
really standing and shocking, and kind of, how do we get to really believe that oral history? Is that an important part of that research?
It's so important. So very important, yes.
I think some of it is yeah, it's important to recognize I have this incredible wealth of ancestry information, and the Moffett Ladd House and Gardens is a historic house museum. I can walk through the rooms where my ancestors were, and I could learn from the executive directors. We have current and former. Like that amount of resources. Your point, JerriAnne, about oral history, I think in researching Black history in America, I have to ask when I'm looking at the records I do have, what's not being told, what's not here. And I've learned from different Black historians, for example, in Manhattan, there were fires, and the pattern of fires showed acts of resistance, that people enslaved were resisting slavery, and there's a record in the arson. So it can be different things, and I think that's why the horse chestnut tree is so important here in Portsmouth, where William Whipple and Prince Whipple's stories interconnect. But to ask, there's the oral history, but I'm curious too, like, there's a brick wall, right, where you get to the,
Real brick.
especially, like in the South, you're looking at those slave schedules with no names.
Exactly.
And here the brick wall it's a little different, I will say, because Valerie Cunningham wrote Black Portsmouth. So me understanding slavery connections in my family actually was like, let me read Black Portsmouth and build my tree, and guess what? Every time I read about an incredible person who lived here in Black Portsmouth, I go, uh-oh, that last name. Oh, in my tree. So it's the combination of research.
What happens?
And I know Valerie Cunningham found a lot of records in the church, the North Church records. You know, so I learned from your footnotes. I was like, oh, another place to look. But it's how to put together the clues, because you don't have this. There's so many reasons why you don't have the written record.
Exactly.
And then the dehumanization in the documents before 17.
You had the wherewithal to start looking for last names. We all do that, you know? Even if it might be a neighbor, we all do that. We all interview people that we're not sure, maybe over the phone, maybe by letter. You know to do that, because you know you're going to pick up little pieces here and there. I tried to interview a woman, a beautiful lady. She was 101 years old, and I saw a picture of her in the Portsmouth Herald. I'm going to say this was probably late 80s, maybe very early 90s. And I knew that her last name was the neighbor from where my father grew up on Lovell Street. And I knew that they were all close with the Frisbees. Well, her son was in California, and he said, well, you can go and interview her. I don't know. She's 101. I don't know what she's going to be able to tell you. But I was working it. And, and she was so sweet. Yes, she remembered Emma. She remembered Emma very well. But she wasn't able to give me anything really concrete. But it's those things that bump you ahead. I just sat with a lady and had tea who knew Emma, who also was enslaved. I don't know how she got to Portsmouth. At that time, I didn't know. But that bumps you, and it just gives you the reason for going on, yeah. And that book, Valerie's book, when you started me on genealogy, I was working with you on a committee to organize some of that information. That's when she said to me, well, you better get started. I said, well, who is this? She said, you better get started. Oh, excuse me. So anyway, you have a lot of people along the way. A lot of people along the way that do that.
So
You want more?
I'm sure we're gonna, and I'll open it up to the floor in a minute. But there's a moment in, you guys have seen the film Traces of the Trade, Catherine Brown's journey into finding her ancestry and finding the real huge connection her family had to slavery, the largest slave traders in New England at the time, the Brown family that started Brown University. But there was a moment that she talked about the mural that was on the wall that was of, she had seen it all her life growing up, and there was this painting of two Black kids, and there was a song that went with it that she would sing, but only when she started doing this work did she paid no attention to that because that was just part of her world, right? And it meant nothing until she did the work that she found out that the two people who the mural was for were actually enslaved to her family. And that shocked her, right? That's how could I have been so ignorant to this story? Was there that moment, that shocking moment in any of this research that you did that really said, how could I have missed this? How could I have missed such a moment?
For me, it was, okay, so I read the letters, I learned that my ancestors enslaved people, and then I went on the Moffett Ladd House and Gardens website at the time, and I read as much as I could, thankfully, information, and I learned that Samuel Moffett was responsible for the Triton, which was a slave ship. And that took it to another level, like, and I've had a question, I still carry this question, what happened, who was on that ship? You know, how do I reckon with this history? How do we honor their lives? These questions are real. And I learned there was a citation, and I think Barbara Ward, I'm assuming that was you, put that out there about, it came from the Sibney's Harvard graduates. There was a book that had information about the Triton. So we're tracking the Triton, right? So years went by, and I just always had this question of the Triton. I was going to my college reunion, must have been 5 years ago. And before I went, I thought, let me look up, I was at my mom's house, I was like, let me do some more search on the Triton. I want to get my hands on Sibney's college graduates. I want to read that book. And I searched, where is this available? Where is this available? Wesleyan University. That's where I went to school. So when I went to my 25th reunion at Wesleyan, I went early, and I went by myself into the stacks that smell like college. Like, I'm walking through the stacks, and it's my 25-year memories of like, oh, I remember being sleepy here. I go down to the stacks, and there in the stacks, there it is. There's this book, and I pull it out, and I'm reading about Samuel Moffett in my alma mater, where I graduated. Now, I didn't major in history, but I graduated ignorant of slavery in New England. So it was one of those moments of like, it's hidden in plain sight, is that the phrase I've heard you say? And I think about James Baldwin saying, you know, it might have been Wells would have been written on the sky. It's right in front of us. Right in front of us. Yeah. I mean, as soon as I was like, slavery in New England, Google it. It's right there. I mean, how many dissertations? Yeah. So that was a moment for me.
Yeah. There's a lot of them. I'm not sure I can even isolate one. But again, with Emma Reed, finally finding out why she ended up in Portsmouth, because they had been enslaved together. When he left and came here at 10 years old, somehow they stayed in touch all that time. So, you know, that was a moment for me. I think the other moment was very recently, since I've moved back about 2 years ago. I'm retired, and I have a lot more time, but I don't always use it for the purposes of genealogy. I have wicked allergies. I mean, it's like if I talk, I start sneezing or coughing. But with the family in Berwick, Maine, it was only through that family that I was able to become a daughter of the American Revolution. And here's Valerie again. I mean, she's been in my life. One day she called me, I'm going to say in the 90s. I don't think I was married then. And she said to me, I'm really straight out. Could you go and speak before the Daughters of the American Revolution at their luncheon? They want to know about Black history or genealogy. And I said, sure, I'd love to go. So I did about 3 of those, and they were always so generous, giving me I'm a reader, giving me history books, you know, as a gift. And they would always say to me, now if you find, you're doing genealogy, if you find somebody in your tree that fought in the Revolutionary War, well, let us know. And I would go, yeah, right, I'm really Well, about 2 months later, I was online, and a gentleman who was doing or had done his PhD on how Berwick was built on the backs of Black people send me all of his information, all of his research. And I had every name of every Williams family member in my hands. And for some reason, the first Williams was, that I was able to get into the DAR, had been long gone, of course, but he did fight in the Revolutionary War in the Navy. And the second one, his name was Grandis, depending on what you looked at. In other places, he was Grodis, and in other places, he was just G, and in some places, he was, I think I actually found something that had the name Gary, and I thought, oh no, because he was born in probably, he's probably born in 1792. So anyway, I was bored, I guess, this particular day recently, and I thought, no. It was when I was working at the office. I said, no, I gotta find his first name. Well, long story short, I started typing in Grodis, because Grodis was the name that was most often written. His death certificate is wrong, it says Grandin. Well, I found out at that time that the family that probably brought them to work to Berwick were in the rum trade. And they were also shipbuilders. Oh, that was it for me. Now I'm running. I'm really running. I got this new information, come to find out, in one of the West Indian islands, Grodis is a very popular surname. I knew then. Likely, I need to do a little bit more research, but it probably is Grodis, and he was probably from there and was brought as a slave to Berwick, but was probably named for somebody who had that surname. It's amazing, and I get the goosebumps now. That's the feeling.
I need to ask a follow-up. In Berwick, what were the names of the enslavers or the last names?
Okay, I'm not quite sure, but this may be a hint. They're all buried. They're all buried with a family called, I gotta get the name right, Berry, B-E-R-R-Y. They're all buried with a family named Berry.
All right, I'm going to look up my tree in a moment after this, and
Please do.
I'm sure we're
And I
connected.
can give you a couple of other names too, but I don't have the
You're
research.
seeing it
in front.
happen live. This is what happens in Coming to the Table. And by the way, on Zoom, if you're in Coming to the Table on Zoom right now, just put CTT in the chat. There's a lot of people there. But we start talking,
Yes,
and really
yes.
important is to name people.
Yes.
And especially the African-American
Yes,
Black ancestors,
yes.
to name as we're speaking. And I'm just going to briefly share, but this connects to
I'm
Berwick.
loving that you're doing that.
So my 9th generation great-grandfather in Kittery, we know in 1674, we know that he enslaved 3 men, 2 women, 2 girls, and 1 boy. We don't know their names. I do have that question, though. Like, how many of them are ancestors of the next generation of Black history here?
And that was Moffat?
No,
what was
this is the grandfather of William Whipple and the grandfather of Catherine Cutt Moffat.
Oh.
Right, I'm connected through Catherine.
And they were
Cutt.
in Kittery.
They were in Kittery, and then the next generation also built ships. But also we know this was a shipbuilder. He's known for a shipbuilder. Who else was building ships? What craftspeople, what skills,
Exactly.
what were they doing, and where did those ships go?
Yes.
And then in the Moffat Lad House, we know that Prince Whipple and Windsor Moffat were enslaved in the space. Sioux and Duke, Sambo and Gambia. Those are the 2 men that were in the letter and were not named. Putting the pieces together years later with the 1768 inventory. I believe those are they were sent. So they were in Portsmouth, and they were enslaved by John Moffat's son Samuel. But when he fled, they stayed. They also got resold and rebought. That's another conversation. But they were still in this house, and then they got sent with the family to the Indies. I know they stopped in Barbados, and so I have this question too. Did they go all the way to Demerara? Did they then have to work on a cotton plantation? Yeah? We know that? Sioux and Duke? I mean, Sambo and Gambia? Oh, good. Oh, good. Beautiful. And connections, Roxana Moffett, and then Cupido was actually something I found by just literally Googling John Moffett and reading things online that I could find. But a letter, this was in the, before this time, I think in the 1740s. And then in Guyana, we have a letter from Domingo Wilkes that I'm sure you've read and know that many more people were enslaved.
What do you know about Roxanne?
I know what I learned from Barbara Ward, who could probably tell it better.
Oh, she's back there.
Do you want to share? We'll get a mic. All right, cool. Yeah, a lot of people in the room I learned things from are right here.
Well, Roxana one great place to look for information is in administration accounts and executors' accounts for probate. And in John Moffat's accounts, there's mention of Roxana because she was a woman he enslaved, and he let her out. That is, he received payment for letting out her labor to his son-in-law.
Yes, that was.
And his son-in-law came at the time that, when you died, then they'd put an ad in the paper and say, everybody who owes money, come forward. And he said that John Moffat's estate owed him for the cost of a doctor attending the birth of the 4 children of Roxana. We don't know I don't know. I won't say we don't know. I will say, as far as I know, no one has found what happened to the 4 children. And that's an incredible story,
Did she live in the house?
Did she ever live in that? We don't know. Probably before she was let out to a son-in-law, but we don't know. And you're talking about not Sue and Duke, but when you're talking about Sambo and Gambia, when you're talking about the.
Roxana has always sort of been this mystery person. Did she live in the attic? Where did she live?
Well, we know that she lived in his son-in-law's house. Now, the interesting thing is the son-in-law, his wife had died, so his direct connection to John Moffat was deceased, and he was at that point a widower. And that's. I think the location. Yes, it was in Portsmouth. I don't think the house is there anymore, and I can't immediately recall where it was. I should be able to, but I can't. Sorry.
So before we open it to the floor, and it looks like we're all ready. No, that's really good. It was part of this. That's okay. This will open it to the floor. Recently, maybe last year, Henry Louis Gates has a series, Finding Your Roots. And I know Ben Affleck was really surprised about finding that his relatives were enslavers, and he asked PBS not to air that part of the program, right? So that part was not aired, and then it, created all this, censorship and what's going on here. And, it was that shame he felt of being connected to slavery at that time. So when you do this work, you come up on that. But if we're looking to reconcile this history, how do you think we best go about this reconciliation?
That's a hard question because there's so many feelings, and with slavery, which ties to racism and prejudice, we saw it happen here in Portsmouth when we had tried to have conversations on race. They just fell apart because people got angry and people left, and it just didn't work out. So I don't really have a good answer as to how to reconcile everything, but I do know that we can't stop. And just recently, in the last couple of years, I've been reading work done by an author who's Black in London, and she approaches it from the perspective of bias as opposed to racism, because we all have biases, and racism is a bias. And I looked at her, what she does, and people sit and they talk. Like if you and I don't have anything in common, we think, but we could sit down and talk about the problems in racism, because all it is bias. And we do have that in common. So I go back always to teaching and education. You just got to find ways to do it where people don't get teed off and leave the table. And that's what I've been looking for a long time. Are things getting better? A lot better in many ways, but not enough.
I've got to give a shout out to Resma Medicam. This book, My Grandmother's Hands, I've come back to multiple times, reading and then inviting other people to read and process together. I've both co-facilitated cross-racial groups and also white affinity spaces for white people to do the work, just processing that he calls for. But I think on this question, and the Affleck story is a good example, recognizing, first of all, to actually process history, to actually reckon, it's trauma. It's a history of trauma. And as a person who descended from the profiting of the trauma and currently has the benefit on the side of racial privilege, in the beginning when people were like, hey, if you're gonna look into your ancestors, you need to go to this workshop on trauma. And I was still all in the brain. I was like, meh, I'm just, finding the facts. Let me get to the truths. I'm in that urgency and that kind of numbing out. But I now understand this, any kind of dodge, it's the dodges, like that was a dodge. Both Ben Affleck saying, I'm not gonna share this, but anyone else who would say, I get this response from white people like, oh, I'm sorry. Like if I talk about my ancestors being enslaved, they're kind of looking at me like, I'm sorry, kind of like, better you than me. It's always a deflection. There's so many deflections. And I think this, getting the historical context is important, because in the beginning, and we're talking about bias and there's individual racism, but in the beginning, I was looking at the individual. Samuel Moffett enslaved 2 men, what are their names, and how do I reckon with this ancestor? That's how I first approached it. But now that I see this, and I see the economic, I was looking at what are the policies, how did my family profit directly from race-based policies? And then you see all the way down, and this is just what you're seeing up there is slavery, but then you take it forward. We looked at redlining. My dad's on the Zoom, right? I invited my dad, like, hey, what was that address where you lived? And what was that address where you moved when you had a better school? And we looked at it on the redlining maps of Dedham, Massachusetts. I've looked at redlining descendants from black and white going down, and there's a through line of history where it's not just about the bias and about can't we all get along. We have to reckon with the economic disparity, the absolute injustice. If you want to look at prisons, you want to look at schools, any aspect, these are real lived realities. So even if we kind of come to, if there, I don't know, it's massive, but it has to be on all those levels.
Thank you so much. On that note, anybody have questions? Okay. Can you just wait on the mic for, a second, yeah.
Oh, no, I don't.
They can't hear you on Zoom.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay, that's okay.
I work at the Moffett Ladd House. I've been a tour guide there for 7 years. And when we get to the top floor, and we're talking about Prince Whipple and the relationship, I often hear people say to me, well, it couldn't have been that bad. Look at this house, look at this room, and look at where, it wasn't that bad. And I want to just go, wait a minute, but you don't want to tick people off either. You don't want to be confrontational. Yeah. How would you answer that question, having done a lot of research, both of you, on the history of Portsmouth slavery? How would you answer that question? Well, it wasn't really that bad.
Ooh, that's a good one. And to be honest, so I took a course online called Slavery in the Colonial North. It was a week long with educators to talk about educating about slavery. And we got to listen to a lot of different Black historians, each day, different person. And I learned a few things there and from the Black Heritage Trail. And it's really how I'd answer it, I feel like I've learned I want to cite many people that I've heard say this, but I think it's important to look at the evidence of the cruelty. So first up, grab the petition, read the words that the 20 signers used to describe slavery. I know, but then point out point out miserable servitude. Point out the words that are in that petition. That's one. You have self-emancipation. People getting out of there, and they're being sent back. And then you have children, Prince Whipple was 10, being forced separated from their family and their language and their name, and then being isolated from community, right? So these are the things, I try to go to what are the facts that show. But then there's also that trauma piece. That's a dodge. I do the dodges too. I mean, I don't say that one, but I still have other dodges. I need to be aware I'm gonna dodge. How do I kind of soften the blow of this absolute terror? It's a terror, slavery.
It is a terror.
And there are moments, I'll be honest, that drop me to my knees, like the 1768 inventory and seeing in cursive with my own eyes 100 iron handcuffs. Even in this moment saying that, I'm not at the full space that when I'm alone in a space, I just drop to my knees and visualize that.
There's also a website. I can't tell you what it is now, but we can exchange information because I'm going to say it was after George Floyd that this stuff started popping up, so people could go to this site and educate themselves on such questions. What do I say here? What do I say there? I'm sure I can find it again. Really good. You know, I was plagued in the 80s. I was attending Metro State College in Denver, and I had some guy come to me. I don't remember the class, but a couple of guys, and they both said to me, you know, we're so tired of hearing that slavery caused the Civil War. You know, and they went on and on and on, and they made me double think, because I really wasn't into history like I am now. It made me think, but that's how you can get empowered to answer those questions. So, yeah, we can get together, talk, text. Okay. Okay.
I have a question. My question is for Tonya, is that growing up, you know, and with the heritage, the lineage, was it always talked about, you know, in your household as far as, you know, the history of your great-great-grandfathers, as far as, you know, he was a great shipbuilder, you know, the overall history, and as you told the story today, that a lot of pieces were left out. And so I think you told us that, you know, you uncovered that in the library, but just tell us about growing up, and which, you know, and when you first realized that there was an issue.
That's a really good question, and it's a good question to ask at 2 generations. But for my generation, I feel like the historians skip a generation. Now, my mom was pretty into it, but my grandfather was very into the Moffett Lad House. I know that since he passed. We didn't ever talk about this. We never talked about this history. But I see the letters he wrote. I know he wanted to go to events in the 90s. So I know it was important to him. And he was also telling the Moffett Lad House, send this to my 3 children, here's their addresses. So I know the parents were getting it, but I wasn't. I heard nothing about it. I did not know I had ancestors here at all. I knew I had to do a report in 5th grade on my ancestors, and I remember thinking, they just go all the way back to England. I was a little bit bored with that, sorry, England. And so I borrowed my stepmother's heritage, and I chose Norway to report on. I really had no clue. But when through this work, talking to people, and my dad's on the Zoom, my dad and I had this conversation, I remember over dinner one time, and he said, yeah, I always knew our ancestors were merchants. I just didn't know what. And then the real one that hit me, and Mom's in the room. So my mom has been, she's from a different line. She's not descended from the same Portsmouth people, but she's been 100% on board every time I'm here. We're in the Athenaeum together. We're researching. We're reading all the books. It was a few years ago when we learned that Edward Holyoke, a president of Harvard, who's a direct ancestor, enslaved Juba and Bilha. And we learned also that there's a plaque and there was an honoring and a beautiful thing you can look online to see. But I know for my mom, it was this, even being 100% in and on board with me, it was this, wait a minute, his portrait, was it on your grandfather's house? On the wall. His portrait was on the wall.
Great-grandfather's house. I grew up in Danvers, Massachusetts, Essex County.
Hi, I'm Tonya's mother, Sandy Nichols Ward, and I grew up on Nichols Street, I thought that was normal, in Danvers. And at one end of the street, there was the great-grandfather's house where some maiden aunts were still living, and we went over there all the time, and we played cards, and we begged for ribbon candy, and, I was a kid. There were dark walls, funny smells, and big portraits that were so darkened with age. And the old women were talking. They were so proud of the Holyokes that were up there. They were proud of this one and that one and the other one and Edward Holyoke and whatever, just the names. But I didn't care about any of that at that time. I just know, I'm so proud of it. Later, I'm living in California. I have a last name of Ward. I wanted a more distinctive, so Tonya Holyoke Ward. I gave her the middle name of Holyoke.
That's my maiden middle name, Tonya Holyoke Ward.
And my uncle was Edward Holyoke Nichols. The Holyoke name is in a middle name because they were descendants of daughters rather than sons, so that's the way to carry it on. And so we've been just proud of that forever. The fact that I live in the city of Holyoke in Western Massachusetts, it didn't occur to me that that had a relationship. Of course it has a relationship. That's great. But anyway, Reverend Edward Holyoke was in Marblehead, Massachusetts, in what we would describe as a Unitarian church for many years there, and then he was tapped to come to Harvard to be a president of Harvard. You had to be a minister to be a president of Harvard then, and Harvard in those years had 100 students, so it's kind of a different game than what you think of now. But to learn, but we think of them as in that family as Unitarian ministers and abolitionists. I'm descended from abolitionists. I kept kind of quiet about it. I'm watching her deal with my ex-husband's family.
See, it's that.
Yeah, and so in February 2021, when I had this awakening, Tonya comes to me and said, "How do you feel now?"
That's great.
Someone back here.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Sue Sterry, and I am co-chair of the Portsmouth Historical Cemeteries here in town. And the reason I want to bring that up is because in the last 4 months, we've been working with the family of Dinah Chase Whipple to get a headstone in North Cemetery to honor her. And during this process, that personally, for me, looking up more history and things like that, I wonder how many whites in this room can identify important or the contributions of black women during these periods of the 16, 17, and 1800s. I mean, everyone can say Harriet Tubman, I'm sure, but it's unfortunate our city has never recognized Dinah Chase Whipple because her school that she started for black children back in the 1700s is not recognized or is not a part of our history here in town. I mean, a few people know that, but in general, I was born and raised here. So that contribution the only other connection or the other schooling that was going on at the time was in Boston, I believe. So there's a question who started what. But she never got the recognition that she deserved even back then. And her school went on for many years. She died poor, and North Church paid for her burial in the cemetery with a, she may have had a marked headstone at the time, but it's not there anymore. So thanks to the Moffett Ladd House, who's made a contribution to erect a headstone, and the cemetery committee is taking care as far as getting it in there and all of that. I'd just like to point that out, that there are a lot of black women, and we hear about Prince Whipple and others, black men here in town, but we need to recognize our women too. So thank you. And thank you to the Moffett Ladd House.
And thank you to Valerie Cunningham, who, with the Yancey family and I at the cemetery, planted that seed and collaborated with us on submitting all the documentation to the cemetery committee. So it's been a collective work. Beautiful.
So I think you bring up a really interesting point here that I just want to just highlight a bit. The visibility of this history. Everywhere you go in New England, in our town in Portsmouth, you recognize the names of the white families. We've got the Moffett Ladd House. We've got the Langdon House.
Cutts.
You know,
Yes.
all of the families, early settlers in the town. But until the Portsmouth Black Heritage Trail started putting out markers, there was no visible connection to the town's black history, much less the town's connection to slavery. Next to Rhode Island, Portsmouth was the largest traders in human bodies. And if you can imagine, there's nothing that tells us that in our history. Our kids in school don't know that. That's not part of what they're taught. You know, slavery is in the South. We don't even talk about Rhode Island, right? When we talk about slavery, we talk about southern states. So this making these histories visible changes the landscape and changes what we know about our histories. So for all that work that the Portsmouth Black Heritage Trail did, thank you, Miss Valerie.
Oh, yeah.
And I will say one more thing. Even with the history being visible with markers, sometimes we tend not to believe it. For years, there was a marker on the house on Court Street that designated the area as the African burying ground. And it really wasn't until they dug up remains, and the remains were tested and proven to be DNA, the DNA proved that they were from the west coast of Africa, that the people believed it.
Yes.
We had to have the proof that it did exist. So conversations like this are really important to keep those stories so that we're asking people to change their belief, which is a very hard thing to do. So it has to be repeated over and over and over till there is some kind of, and we never know when people will connect to that aha moment. Yes, this did happen. It happens differently for everybody, but it's making these stories visible. What we see and hear, we start to believe.
And pass it on.
And
That's when
pass
you
it
start
on.
passing it on, that's right.
But black people have been passing on their stories orally for generations. Where I grew up, there were always visible stories. I grew up in Jamaica. There was always visible markers of our history. We were always taught our history from the moment we were birthed. You know, we knew all our heroes who fought against slavery, and they were heroes. They were not hidden, right? that just like here, there's a Sam Sharp Park, or this person, where that person was hung, or, you know, there were markers all across the country that spoke to this history. Question, there's, okay.
Hi. My son-in-law is a chief from the Sheaf Wharf. She's related to the Sheaf family. And I don't know if it was Valerie's book. I've read Valerie's book, and I've read the Judd book, Ona Judd's book. But there was some talk that the Sheaf family, that wharf did not bring in enslaved people. And was it that your book? No, I don't know where I read it then. But I just couldn't believe if her family's bringing in enslaved people, why the Sheaf Wharf wouldn't have also been.
That's right.
Yeah. I don't know where I read that.
There was also, at that time, there were, on the old maps, there were 10, 12 different wharfs down there. So I don't know, I haven't done the research, but I've seen the maps because we're working on Point of Graves. So it wasn't just the Sheafs that were down there. There were a lot of other families and boat owners and captains and things like that. So that may contribute to why they say the Sheafs didn't allow it, but I don't know for sure.
There was a question in the chat. Oh, sorry. There was a question.
Go ahead.
No, sorry. There was a question in the chat. I don't know if anybody knows. What was Prince Whipple's given name?
We don't know. I mean, yeah. I want to just say something briefly on that. When you mentioned, is it true that there were no people enslaved through this wharf? It makes me think also what JerriAnne was saying about how much proof had to be provided to say, yes, there's a burial ground here. And I think critical literacy is really important, and to realize that the absence of evidence doesn't mean no, definite no. Let's not argue yes or no it happened. It's kind of like we don't have evidence yet. What I continue to learn in this research, and other people who've been in this research with me, we just look at each other and go, oh yeah, is that when you go looking for things, you find things. And there are moments that are just like, I cannot believe this. Oh yeah, I can believe this. Of course I can believe this. This is what happens every time. So I just would encourage that. We don't have evidence yet, and it's a great question.
I'm going to ask Barbara to just talk about the naming of Prince Whipple, just to answer the person online, real quickly, and then we'll go to his question.
The original name.
Yeah.
Well, I think.
Because it speaks to that kind of research that we're doing when we're looking for Black ancestors and their naming, you know.
Well, one of the issues that we encounter, of course, is that people who were enslaved were stripped of their own names. And part of the dehumanizing process of enslavement was to strip the person of their original name. And people have said, is it possible that Prince Whipple was actually a prince? It absolutely is possible. Is it possible that he was not a prince and that this was a name that was given to him by his enslavers? Yes, it's also very possible that that's the case. And because of this desire, this clear policy of stripping people of their identity, I feel that it's unlikely that an enslaver would have recognized the status of someone they enslaved had they been a prince. But we don't know for sure. And I think that's the important thing to indicate, is we don't really know. But we do find this pattern of enslaved people being given classical names like Caesar and Plato, and all these classical names. And it's really sort of characteristic, as I'm reading some about Jamaica, it seems pretty characteristic of New England and of the northern states to have done this. So that's another point to think about as well. And there are some names, however, that were kept. Yes. Like Cuffy is a Nigerian name that meant, and I'm going to get this wrong probably, you're born on a Wednesday or born on a Friday. And Quaco is born on a Wednesday. And I've also seen in Portsmouth records the name Quaco, and I've never found Quaco, who that might have been, but there's a Quaco in a record of people shipping coastwise the lumber, and there's a Quaco in there. So Quaco is also a name from West Africa. So we don't really know. And some were given, common English names. I think one of the things that must be confusing in genealogy too is that when someone was enslaved, sometimes they were associated with the surname of the person that enslaved them, but they may have been sold and kept the name of an old and a previous enslaver, and so there's a lot of confusion with names. That was way too long. Yes, and that's one of the things that I had wondered about, because the largest ship or the largest cargo of enslaved people connected to Portsmouth is actually a ship owned by William Whipple, signer of the Declaration of Independence, and his brother Joseph. And that was named the Black Prince. And I've always wondered, particularly considering the date when that arrived, if that might have been the ship that Prince was on.
It's interesting.
Hi, my name's John Nichols, and I run the Woodman Museum in Dover. I just wanted to thank you, Tonya and Shelia, for coming to speak today, and for the Black Heritage Trail and Moffett Ladd for putting on this event, because this is truly such an important conversation to have. Being part of a museum myself and working with other museums, I think conversations like this and education like this show that museums are not stagnant displays, but more research and educational resources. And so I was really proud of our partnership last year on the Nellie Brown Mitchell marker in Dover. And I guess I'm just asking, what resources are available for institutions who are trying to reinterpret or trying to showcase this history for their town, their community? The Black Heritage Trail, obviously a huge resource in itself, but what other resources are available for that?
Resources? Well, I can share one slide and just a shout out to local historians who write local history books. I find this especially in New England. Now, this was, a lot of things I bought that aren't all relevant, but especially like the Port of Portsmouth and the Cotton Trade and Black Portsmouth and Lives of Consequence. Those 3 books gave me invaluable information. And it really took being here and walking through the gift stores of the local history shop and finding these books. But I think that's a really important piece. There's also the Atlantic Black Box Project that's more about connecting and networking, but there are a lot of great, in fact, I feel like I might have met you in one of those sessions. Do you do the Atlantic Black Box? No, but okay. I think we ran into each other on the way. Yeah, I think we had a Zoom. It's you connect, you share a name, and then you're like, oh, let's jump on a Zoom and share names.
I have a question over here. Hi, I'm Maddie Beal. I'm the Education and Interpretation Manager at Moffett Ladd. And I think one of the things that's really striking to me in this event in particular, but in a lot of museums that I've worked at, and I've been in Portsmouth as an educator for 15 years, is that it always sort of takes a community to, and you've alluded, both of you, Shelia and Tonya, it really takes a community to make the visibility happen and make the conversations happen. You're not discovering things in a vacuum and then just sort of throwing them out there into the air. It's you're throwing them out into a group of people to start a dialogue, and then that's how things stick, and that's how things grow, and that's also how people learn. You know, when you have a group of kids and you're like presenting them with new opportunities, they're going to learn in a really excited way because it feels new. And I think in a lot of ways this is sort of a good way, I guess, in museum education to approach things, because a lot of this information is new to people. So I'm glad that we're able to have, I guess, conversations like this that are new to Moffett Lad, or new to the Black Heritage Trail, or new to the Portsmouth community, because I think it really helps us to keep learning and growing. So I just wanted to thank you for being here. But
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just add one thing for a resource. Definitely, you want the Black perspective, which is why we're very intentional about having different perspectives. Be sure to read, like reading Black Portsmouth, I learned a lot of facts and history, but I think most importantly, seeing how Valerie told the story, seeing what does she emphasize? How did Valerie and Mark Sammons, okay, two co-authors, seeing how you told the story, I look at word choice. So read, and also I'm reading Indigenous perspectives. Be intentional about who you're reading, and then notice how the word choice changes. And then have a conversation about that. I brought some of my white family members together, everyone who was willing. We read Black Portsmouth and we talked about it, both to talk about the history, but then to be like, what were parts that felt uncomfortable? And it wasn't necessarily the facts, it was the framing. When you really name the cruelty, or you name what's happening, or you name slavery in this way that's not centering the white perspective, you're no longer talking about a successful merchant. The word choice changed. You're talking about human trafficking, you're talking about forced servitude. So I think for museums and educators, for me, I'm still a student of that. I don't have the answer, but it's necessary to question beyond our perspective.
So I know there were just two, we're kind of almost at the end of our program, so if you can make your questions really quickly, then we'll sum up and let people have their Saturday. It is Saturday, right?
Hello. Really quick question. Emma Reed, your ancestor.
Yes.
I'm here.
Thank you.
It came north from North Carolina. One, did she come north as a slave? Two, is it common for the man she married? He came north at age 10 as an enslaved person. Was it common for enslaved people to be imported to New Hampshire at that time when it was a hub of slave traffic? And if so, if you have any insight into that.
Oh, I do.
Secondly, did she come mainly because she had family in Berwick, or to marry someone she knew when she was 10?
You know, and I may have set up some confusion here. Emma Reed, the photo here.
This man right here.
Oh.
He gets the last question.
Okay.
His hand
I'm
was up
sorry.
forever, sorry.
It's okay. Was my paternal side, which I started researching first. My grandmother that I spoke of was also my maternal side, but Dad's mom as opposed to Dad's dad. Okay, Dad's mom as opposed to Dad's granddad, who was enslaved. She wasn't enslaved. She was born in 1896, but the wife of Samuel came in about 1880, well after slavery. But they had been enslaved together in Virginia. Does,
They were enslaved together.
yes, the picture is up now.
Yeah, I put it back.
Okay, yes, and let me just show you who these people are real quickly, because I know we're running out of time. But yeah, he was brought at 10 years old. I never knew how old he was. I say 10 now because somehow I overlooked the 1870 census, state census of Massachusetts, he had been taken to Mass to learn to read and write by Captain Benton, who was also Captain, middle name, family Holyoke. She came many years later. Okay. Emma came many years later. But I think the families had always stayed in touch. And then this was her mother, who came a few years after she married Samuel and came to Portsmouth. So does that help?
The question was it common for people in Portsmouth to buy slaves from North Carolina? That was my question.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Yeah, no, and when she was born in the Carolinas, again, it was 1896, so I don't know about before then, but I don't think in all the time that I've read and talked with Valerie and read things that had been written here, that it was not a common practice, I would say. Yeah, thank you for that question.
There were some records that showed, yes, they did. They would buy enslaved people. You know, somebody would send a note. I'm looking for this person, a 2-year-old boy or a 4-year-old girl, and they would send it somewhere, and they would bring enslaved people here. It was a trade that was going back and forth. Yeah. New Hampshire, we were smuggling people out because we had live free or die in New Hampshire, but we were also bringing them in from the Caribbean.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay, no, I just wanted to comment regarding, you were talking about visibility and awareness, and over in Kittery for the past 5 years, we've had this annual event where, because William Whipple was born and raised in Kittery, each year we have him, a reenactor, it's not him, read from the Declaration of Independence that he signed, you know, because we're really proud of that. And the timing of this event is really remarkable because just about a month or so ago, we started talking about this year including Prince Whipple reading from the Petition of Freedom. So we're going to have and it's funny because we call it Whipple's reading, and it's really because, you know, we're going to have 2 Whipple's readings. But one of the things that really put this over, though, is just reading that Petition of Freedom. I mean, that's just a gorgeous piece of writing.
Yes.
Yes. And then you just think of all the, you know, the passion and, you know, and everything that went behind that. It just really, you know, if that doesn't get you, I don't know what will. So, but again, the timing of this event just really like.
That's great.
It was almost like the cosmos saying, "Hey."
Yeah.
Well, thank
really
you.
great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for that. Give a round of applause for everybody that's up here today. It's just important to educate others and to learn about the history. I brought my son here, he's my youngest, here just to educate him because we have a history in our family about another story. But anyway, it was just really enlightening and educational. And I'm one of the tour guides for the Black Heritage Trail, and I'm do the Prince Whipple tour. And that's you should come on my tour because I'm going to give from his perspective and how he landed here and his journey. So to educate you all, you should come. But anyway, I'd like to thank Tonya, Sheila, and definitely JerriAnne. And a round of applause for Valerie Cunningham, who I've met.
Yes.
You know, I started this journey many years ago when Valerie started the Black Heritage Trail, Black History, the story. And I've been with this journey. I got out of it, came back in, and I'm glad I'm a part of it again because it's a rich history. It needs to be told. And if it wasn't for the placards that are around telling the story would never be told, and it's really important. I'd also like to thank the Moffett Ladd House and the Gardens and the Portsmouth Public Library for just hosting this event today, and the New Hampshire Humanities. I'd also like to remind you of Juneteenth, the artist reception, Najor, Nina Holmes on June 7th, in-depth conversation, The Softer Side of Black Masculinity on June 13th, African drumming ceremony on June 19th. And thank you for coming and tell others about the trail and tell others about what we do and the stories they should attend things like this. Thank you.